Every so often there's a topic that is worth taking a whole Sunday on, and that's what we're doing this Sunday, taking a look at things relating to money. I know that's kind of a broad topic. That's what we've been doing this morning, also a little bit in the bulletin article, and then in tonight's lesson. So, tonight's lesson has 3 different questions that we're asking. So, I know it says questions about giving, but there are 3 separate questions. You want to know how many. Giving is, of course, a good thing. Giving makes us feel good. Jesus tells us it's more blessed to give than to receive. And we know that to be true, but just because giving feels good, that doesn't always mean that good things result from it. Giving also needs to do good, as it needs to have a positive impact, not just on our emotions, but also on the person that we give to. And that's mostly what these questions relate to, is how we give and to whom do we give. And we'll address a few of these questions. These are things that you may have thought about, maybe you've never thought about it, but hopefully they will be interesting and useful as we go through them. It is mostly just a study, but there is application just in the answers to these questions. So, the first question is on whether or not we should give through the church or individually. So, again, some people ask this question. That's why we're addressing it. I've heard this question asked before. I've heard varying viewpoints on this question. And we're going to take a look at this somewhat briefly. But the first thing you have to do to answer this question is, of course, ask another question. And this question is, why do we give to the church in the first place? Well, there's a lot of reasons that we give to the church. And you could have a whole lesson on it, or a couple of lessons just on that topic, because there are so many reasons that we do give. But some of the basics are these. Number 1, it is the New Testament pattern. Simple enough, but it is. It's what God has shown in His New Testament church to be the method by which the church should be supported for doing good works. So we see that. We also see, of course, that it is out of our love that we have for God. That's why we give to the church. If it's by any other motivation, it is not proper. We also would say that we give as we have been prospered. We give because we have been prospered. Side note, back to this morning, we also help determine how much we prosper. If we give based on what we've prospered, but we don't allow ourselves to prosper, how much are we going to give? Again, just a side note back to this morning. So we also give, again, like this morning, because it's not ours in the first place. We give because God has given to us, so we give back to Him. So there's really no shortage of reasons that we can look into for why we give to the church. And then on the other side of that, we ask the question, why do we give individually? Or why should we give individually? And the reasons are kind of the same. One, I'll suggest to you, it's a New Testament pattern that we have, and that by itself should answer this question pretty well, that you can do both. But alongside that, we would say that it's out of our love for God, just like it is given in the church, and it's also out of our love for others. We give to others because we have love toward others. And we give on an individual basis because we're told in the New Testament to do good works, and part of those good works are given both to the church and given individually. So then the question becomes, is it wrong to give on an individual basis? Because normally when I've heard this topic addressed, it is from that point of view, that maybe there's something wrong with us withholding some funds from the church so that we can give to others. Is there a problem with that? Is there a problem with me having enough money left in my bank account to give to somebody else rather than just giving to or giving through the church? Well, again, another passage that we looked at this morning, 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 17. It says there, command those who are rich in this present age not to be arrogant or haughty, not to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God who gives us richly all things to enjoy. After this in verse 18, let them do good, that they may be rich in good works, ready to give, willing to share. As a result, they will store up for themselves a good foundation for the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. We said this morning, this verse is talking to us. We are the rich, at least compared to most people in this world. And if we are the rich, then we are commanded to be rich in good works. There's a good argument you could make just from this verse that the phrase willing to share doesn't just mean laying by in store to the church, but instead means willing to share with all, not necessarily through the church specifically. So we are to be rich in good works as we see here. We also see this exemplified in the New Testament. You can take different characters from the New Testament or even the Old Testament and see this principle at play. You could look at the Good Samaritan, of course. We remember the Good Samaritan as someone who gave, not because he gave through a church, but because he gave individually for someone else's needs. We can also think of Joseph of Arimathea. He was the one that donated the tomb that Jesus would be buried in. That's a good work that has nothing to do with going through the church, but instead he does that out of his own means. And they're following, it would seem, this kind of command from 1 Timothy 6 that the New Testament gives, that they be rich in good works. So, as far as arguments that people would make then against giving on an individual basis, because that's kind of what we're questioning here, is whether it's wrong to ever give on an individual basis. There's a few things we can say. Number one, some people will suggest that it is self-promoting if I give as an individual to someone else. As in I'm giving so that I will look better in someone else's eyes, or maybe the eyes of the people that see that transaction happening. And that's certainly a danger that is there. That's always a danger in giving. It's part of the problem maybe in giving, but that could happen in a church setting as well. But it can be, or can tempt people to be self-interested as they give. Of course, that's more of an issue of the heart than it is whether or not you're giving through the church or individually. The second reason people will give is that it's not anonymous. So some people say this is not an anonymous donation if you're giving from one individual to another. But let me just say there's nothing in the New Testament that would suggest that you cannot give in a way that somebody else knows about. Again, we know about Joseph of Arimathea, and we remember him fondly because he did what he did and because people knew about him. And the Good Samaritan is the same story. They gave individually, and we have a record of it, and we actually lift up the Good Samaritan as being a great person for doing that, and yet some suggest that we should not give in the same pattern that the Good Samaritan did. The third suggestion is that it can take away some of the glory or the credit from the church. And we're going to address that in just a second. But that's probably the biggest reason I've heard against the idea of giving on an individual basis rather than through the church. One more thing very similar to that is that people will suggest that the church can do more collectively than they can as individuals, and therefore it's better to pool the funds of that group so that they can do greater works. Let me say one thing first with that before we move on. That's true most of the time. But in reality, there are individual Christians that have greater wealth than multiple churches put together. And they actually can do more on their own than through the church. So we say that, but that's not actually a hard and fast rule. It's just something that maybe can be used if you're trying to make an argument against this. But it's probably not the best argument. So, a couple things then. Couple things to try to balance this out a little bit with these arguments that are made against giving individually. The first two things that we talked about, it's self-promoting, it's not anonymous. Again, there's not a scriptural basis to say that there's a reason not to give as an individual based on those things. Of course, the danger's there. Of course, it's not anonymous, but it doesn't have to be. The third part, though, taking away glory from the church and then also doing it collectively rather than as one member, you can get more done that way. Those arguments. Part of the problem, if we take that approach, is we are trying to promote two things at the same time, but not allowing both to happen, and it's causing an issue. So if I say, okay, you should only give through the church and no other place ever. That's nice, but what else do we want our members to do? Well, we also want our members to get a good reputation in the community, and of course we want our members to be rich in good works. We want our members to behave like Christ. So go do those things without money. Go do those things. Go get a good reputation in the community, but make sure you don't use any money to do so. That includes buying food for somebody. That includes helping them in any way financially. Don't do that, but go be like Jesus. Go let your light shine, but don't do it in any financial way. It's putting an undue burden on Christians that are trying to do good works if we say that they can only give through the church and not on their own. But here's the bigger issue with this line of thinking. We are the church, right? We are the church. This building is not the church. The church treasury, the church bank account, that's not the church. Whenever I've gone up to people in this community, and they, most of the time it ends up that it's revealed to them that I'm a preacher, and then they start calling me pastor after that. Every time. I don't know why that happens. But whenever they find out, oh, you're the preacher at the Maple Avenue Church of Christ, they usually say, I can tell how great those people are by their bank account. Think that's ever happened to me? Well, I can tell how great those people are because of how nice that building is. That doesn't happen either. They say, I know some folks that go there. Yeah, I know the Simpsons. Sure. Yeah, I know the Warrens. Yeah, I know them. They're good people, right? I know the Summers. I know whoever it is. They don't talk about the building. They don't talk about the bank account because those things don't matter. They talk about the people. When you give as an individual, you give as the church. You're helping to strengthen the whole reputation of the church. And people will know the church because they know you. So maybe there's a lesson in there that we should let more people know where we go to church. But certainly it's not an issue to give outside of that, to build up your own reputation as part of the Lord's church. Because we are all members of the same church, and the light will still be shown in spite of us giving individually, on top of us giving also to the church itself. One more thing as far as balance goes is just the simple question. If we're supposed to give to both, if we're supposed to give some individually and some to the church, how do we find a balance there? I don't really know. I don't have a percentage for you. I think probably most of our giving would end up going toward the church, but if we give to the point that we're not able to help others without the help of the church, maybe there's a problem there. So I know that's not the most helpful answer, but the real answer here is there's not an issue giving individually. It's a great thing to give to the church and through the church, and it's a great thing to give individually. And so long as we're making sure that good works get done, that's probably going to take a precedent over both. So, second question. To whom do we give, or to whom should we give? And fair warning, this whole section is really asking a different question. This just happens to be the title. But there's a specific group of people that we're going to talk about as far as should we give to these people. Actually, that's what these next 2 points are. The first question is, should we be giving to panhandlers? The second question, should we be giving to secular charities? But starting with this first one. First question, should we be giving to panhandlers? First, let me define panhandler. We're talking about somebody that asks for money. Usually we would find someone like this on a street corner. They're a lot more prevalent in large cities. We would normally see them by a store or by the interstate or something like that. But somebody that stands usually by a roadside and asks for money. And the question is, should we give to these people? Well, let's take a look at several things. First being this. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, starting in verse 3, in a whole chapter discussing how the church should handle giving to widows who are Christians, it says this. It says, honor widows who are really widows. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. Within the church, if you have widows within the church that are in need, financially speaking, the church should help them, but it should only help those who are really widows. Sounds strange, but it goes on in verse 4 to define what it means by really widows. So there are widows who aren't really widows. Why? Because they have a support system already that should be taking care of them, especially if they are Christians, the family, if they're Christians. On the other hand, you have widows who are really widows. They have no other support available to them, so what do? You absolutely help them. And there's that that differentiation made between real widows and widows that don't have quite as much need. Again, this is talking about Christians and how they give to people within the church. So does this apply outside the church? Well, it certainly seems to. If it applies inside the church, it certainly seems to outside the church. All that really means is if we're going to give to anyone or anything, we should do our homework before we give. That goes right back to what we talked about this morning. We are responsible for how we manage what God has given to us. If we give in such a way that we give without knowing what we're giving to, then there can be a problem with that, whether that's charity or whether that's talking about panhandlers, but we'll get more into this discussion. So, what do we know when it comes to people that are panhandlers? And we're going to give some statistics here. Of course, statistics are as reliable as they always are, but there's a lot of different ways that you can look at this, a lot of different features that you can look at, but some statistics that we ought to know before we ever even think about giving to someone that's standing on a street corner. A few things. Number one, 82% of people that are panhandlers are homeless. Let me say that again. 82% of people that are standing on the street corner that you're staring at as you drive by are in fact homeless. For a variety of reasons, but they are homeless. And there are about 500,000 homeless people in the United States. That's an issue. That's a big issue. We're not talking about that issue tonight, but that's why this is such a big question. In fact, this is one of the most common questions I get as far as giving is concerned. And it's because there is such a prominent problem. But again, 82% are homeless, which means that 18% aren't, which seems kind of strange as to why they would be panhandling, but we won't try to explain that. 83% are men. So, not to get political or anything, but that does shed an interesting light on the idea of male privilege, if you've ever even heard of that. 83% are male. So, beyond that, 25%, 1 in 4 are United States military veterans. 1 in 4. So again, if you're trying to discover who it is that you're seeing, these are just some facts that might make it a more informed decision. 60% make less than $25 a day in their panhandling. So they might stand there for, actually I think the average number is 6 hours a day, but they are likely to be making less than $25 a day doing that. 62% are considered to be disabled, and that can be physically or mentally, but 62% are. Now that's kind of the side of things that makes it seem like maybe this is something that we should always be giving toward. And that's fair, and I'm not going to give you a straight answer one way or the other on whether or not you should give to panhandlers. Fair warning on that. But there's also another side to it. I'm trying to keep all of this lesson a little bit, or as much balanced as I can. So the other side of this is that 80% of those who are panhandlers have done time in jail. Now, there's a lot of reasons that may happen. In fact, in a lot of states, it is illegal to panhandle, which might have landed them in jail in the first place. So, again, that's 80% have done time, but 25% are alcoholics. So 1 in 4 people that are panhandling are alcoholics. On top of that, 44% in a survey that was done on the subject admitted that they used some of the money to buy drugs. So again, 44%. That would not include alcohol as I understand it. But 44% use money on drugs, and 32% of the whole are addicted to drugs. So again, we have to keep both sides in focus when we're looking at this, the negative factors as well as some worse factors that play a role into it. But if we're talking about panhandling, then who are we talking about? Well, by and large, you're probably looking at someone that is homeless, someone that is a male, someone that's not making a lot of money, even with panhandling, and 1 in 2 chance that they are, or almost 1 in 2 chance that they are using some of the money to buy drugs, 1 in 3 chance that they are addicted to drugs. So the question is just, how do you feel about that? And the answer to that question is going to determine whether or not you are someone that's going to give to panhandlers on a regular basis. So I can't answer that question for you. But given those statistics, the decision has to be made. Now, I'm going to say with this that, of course, there are alternatives to giving directly to panhandlers. There's a lot of government programs, of course, available to people in this exact situation, but there are also state and city level programs that are aimed at panhandling. And money there goes toward soup kitchens and toward other methods besides direct money to these individuals. Of course, as individuals, we can still give to them in a way that's maybe less of a risk as far as them using the money to do something that is illegal or otherwise bad. So we could give instead gift cards, which are still easy enough to trade to get money, but it at least adds another step in there. Of course, we can give meals rather than money itself. We can give to charitable organizations that deal with this issue. And of course, the other option is that we can vet first. Vet meaning that we check out their story, we do a bit of background with them before giving. That does come with some danger as well. But those are alternatives that we can look at as far as giving goes. So some people think in terms of giving to panhandlers that it's best to just give and to let God judge. And I'm not going to say one way or the other on that. That's fair enough, but of course he will judge not just the good things that we do, but he'll also judge the bad works that we do. And that's why I'm trying to keep this balance with giving to people that are panhandlers, because while it is a good thing potentially to give to someone that's in this situation, if we don't know their situation, what are we giving toward? That's the whole question here. In Proverbs, the verse that was read for us, chapter 3, verse 27, 28, it says, "Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due." Question is, does it do good? Does it do good to give to panhandlers? I don't know the answer. It depends on the situation, of course. And sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is yes, they're in a lot of actual need. And sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is they are going to use the money to buy drugs and do other illegal activities. And if that's the case, then did it do good? The answer is absolutely not. So if your neighbor was asking for money to eat and you didn't give it to him, that'd be an issue. If your neighbor was asking for money to buy drugs, that's not a good thing. That is an issue. So again, I can't tell you. I can tell you that it does have a factor, or our conscience does have a factor in the decision that is made. The best thing we can do is get the facts on the subject, and with those facts, try to make our decision the best way that we can. But just remember that when you give, if your conscience convicts you to do so, then go ahead and give. But at the same time, recognize that even if it makes you feel better, it may not be doing any good for the individual that you're giving to. So that's panhandling. Now, third question. This is the last question. So, third question. Should Christians give to secular causes? Secular meaning of the world, not religious, just anything that's anything on this earth. And that answer, of course, is a little bit complicated as well, but we'll take a look at it. So, first things first, there are a lot of options when it comes to giving to a specific cause. And I mean a lot of options. There are approximately 1.5 million charities in the United States. That's a lot of charities. That's more charities than you could possibly give to in a lifetime. And those charities are not the only things available to give to, of course, because as we've said, you can give to individuals. That's always an option. Also, in modern times, there are things like GoFundMe that you can give through. By the way, there are about 250,000 GoFundMes started each year. So there is no shortage of options and opportunities to give. The question is, what should we give to? Now, a lot of these charities are religious in some way or another. A lot of them are not. In fact, most of them are not. And that's really what we're talking about, is should we give to causes that are not religious in the first place? So, charities, of course, are a spectrum. And the spectrum ranges from very good to very bad. And you would think that if something is a charity, it would have to be good, but it's just not the case. There's always people that are looking to make money off of things rather than do any good. We said in the lesson this morning, of course, that we are responsible as managers of what God has given to us. And so even if there's 1.5 million options available, it means that we need to do our homework on any of those before we give to them. So we have to analyze just a little bit. Now, some charities, like we said, they're good. They do a lot of good, and they are pretty honest about what they're doing and what they're doing with your money. There's sites that are available to check in on charities. It's actually pretty easy to find. Just do a Google search of it. But if you research these charities, some sites will give you a certain star rating, 1 through 5, or some will tell you how many cents on the dollar is spent by this charity on the cause that they're supposed to support. So, for example, there's thousands, literally thousands of different charities that are aimed at either relief for cancer or research for cancer or whatever else regarding that disease. And there's some that will give 85 cents, 90 cents on the dollar, every dollar donated to their cause. And that might sound like you're getting cheated out of 10 and 15 cents, but in reality, as far as charities go, it's pretty good. If you can spend 90 cents of the dollar on the cause and 5% on staff and 5% on advertising, you're actually doing pretty good for a charity. But then on the other hand, there are charities that give maybe 50 cents or 60 cents out of a dollar to the cause that you are trying to give to. And most of us would agree that's probably not the best practice, to lose half of the money that you're trying to send to someone. So there are charities all along the spectrum. It's up to us to find out whether or not it's something that is a good cause to give to. Along with that, there are some that are a little bit more sly about their phrasing. And like I said, there are people trying to make money off of everybody, even in charity work. And there's some sites, for example, that will say that 80 cents of every dollar spent goes to their cause, whatever it is. That doesn't mean that 80 cents of every dollar that is donated goes to that cause, just of the dollars that are spent. That doesn't include the salary to the CEO of the charity or to the board of directors of the charity. So there's a big difference in just one word in the way that somebody phrases something. You'll find that a lot with some of these worse charities. So again, just an example of needing to do a little bit of research before we give to anything. So when we're looking at what to give to, there are a lot of different things that we can give to, and there are a lot of things that can be misleading, like we said. Another way that you can be misled is that there are plenty of charities that sound good on the surface, but in reality, like the ones we talked about, they don't actually give that much money to their cause. And even charities, as an example, the American Firefighters Foundation. You would assume that's a good cause to give to, but if you look into it, it's just not. So it doesn't matter what the name is necessarily. It could be something about cancer, it could be something about schools, it could be something about something good, and yet be for a bad purpose, or at least be stealing a lot of the money off the top. As far as giving to different causes that are earthly rather than spiritual, there's not an issue with that. The Bible does not condemn that in any way. We'll have a little bit more to say on that in a second, but there's also a difference in giving to different causes on this earth. And I'm not going to tell you that you cannot give to certain causes if that's where your passion is, but there's probably a better reason to give to one of the best known charitable works, St. Jude's. There's probably a better reason to give to that than the American Birding Association. Why? Because one deals with humans and the other deals with animals. Not that animals aren't important. If you want to donate to a cause that helps animals, that's fine, but as far as Christians go, if you're looking at a soul versus looking at something temporal, might want to check into that. Think about that a little bit first. Of course, charities are largely secular in nature. They're established through our human laws, and they are run by humans, which means that they'll all have their own flaws, but they are largely secular by nature. And by nature, they focus on trying to heal problems in a broken world. So there's only so much good that any charity can do. That doesn't mean that they can't do great things while we're here on earth, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't take care of what we can while we're on earth. But at the same time, they will focus on trying to heal something that's already broken and cannot be healed this side of heaven. So, in Galatians chapter 6, verse 10, a well-known verse, but certainly can be applied here. It says, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all. To all. That might go back to what we said about should we give individually or through the church? Should we give to panhandlers? Well, when we can do good to anyone, that's what we try to do. Again, making sure it's something good that's beneficial to them. But then, of course, it says at the end of the verse here, especially. Especially. Or if you go back to the original language, you can translate it a few different ways. You can say chiefly, which maybe is a worse translation, honestly, than especially. But you can also say most of all, or above all. So if I read this and I say, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, but most of all to those who are of the household of faith, those who are within the church. Should we give to secular organizations? We can, if we want to do good to all, but so long as we follow the idea that above all, we give mostly to those who are of the household of faith. And that might sound kind of self-centered because we're part of that group, but that's the way that God has prescribed it to work because we are focused more on the spiritual than just on the physical. So, again, I don't have a percentage for you as far as how much of your money should be given to given into the church versus into your own bank account to be given in other ways. I don't have a percentage on how much you should consider giving to panhandlers. I don't have a percentage of how much you should be giving to the church versus to secular causes. I don't have that. But what I do know is this. According to this verse, and according to seeking the kingdom first, and according to many other passages, what we know is our first priority as Christians, in life in general, but especially in this case, as we're talking about in giving, our first priority should be the church. Our second priority should be the church. And our third priority should be the church. And after that, something else can fit. Whatever our priorities are as Christians, it's God first. It's His kingdom first. And then after that, we get to decide what we want to do with the rest. Hopefully that helps you answer some of these questions. If there's any of these that you've ever asked in your own mind or that you've wanted to ask or that you've never thought about. But hopefully this gives you something to think about. Maybe it keeps you up tonight trying to figure out the answer for yourself to some of this. But if there's anything we can do for you tonight, this is the time that we want to reach out to you. As we close this lesson, we'll just say that giving doesn't have to be complicated. It's really not that complicated. But our first priority is to God. Our second priority after God has to be His church. And after that, I suppose you'd say it's our families, and then others within the household of faith, and then the rest of the world comes somewhere after that. And again, that might sound self-centered, but it's from the top down, the most spiritual to the least spiritual. And that is, as Christians, how we should view the entirety of our lives. What's most spiritual to what's least spiritual. But the biggest thing that we can take away from this lesson is to question our own giving, to question why we give, to what we give, and how much we give, to where. And if we do that, then this lesson's beneficial, at least for that purpose. But tonight, we do want to offer an invitation to say that God has given us everything, and God has given us one more opportunity to be pleasing to Him. Don't take that for granted. Tonight, if you need to be pleasing to God for the first time by becoming a child of His, do that tonight. Tonight, if you need to repent, if you've fallen away, that's the time to do that as well. And tonight, if you have any other need that the church can assist with, we ask that you come forward now as we stand and as we sing.